So, my name's Daniel Pidcock. I'm the creator of Atomic UX Research and Gleanly, and I really very much welcome you today. Lewis is after a Gleanly t-shirt. I'm sure we can get some sent out. We've also got the hoodies. Well, I think we'll kick off. So, I've got a secret to tell you. They're lying to you. Now, who are lying to you, might ask? Is it my colleagues, my friends, my family, the government perhaps? And the answer is, of course, yes. But that's not what we're talking about today. Instead, I mean reports. Reports are lying to you, specifically research reports. So I've been a UX researcher for about 20 years now, and I think it's more like 22 now, and I'm here to tell you that research reports are shit. Now, that's a big statement to make, but by the end of this talk, I hope to have helped you understand why and explain the reasons why I believe this is true, what we can do about it, and some ideas about how we can go on to make better decisions. So, first of all, let me tell you a little bit about myself and why you should listen to what I've got to say. As I say, I'm a user experience researcher, background in UI design, and I got my first professional graphic design contract when I was 14. That was the client didn't know I was 14 at the time. It was back in the day when before social media, but so a lot of the communication was done over the phone. They only found out I was when they had a launch event and I turned up with my dad, and they shook my dad's hand and said, "Oh, Daniel, thank you very much for your work." He's like, "No, I'm not Daniel. This child here is." But they must have been happy because they kept on giving work to me. So my first proper job was designing bathrooms for millionaires. Did Sting's bathroom and Madonna's bathroom and a few other people. And later on, I founded a digital agency with my co-founder Liam. And in my time, I've designed products for Just Eat, Honda, Microsoft, British Army and the Royal Navy. And I'm also the creator of the Atomic Research Process, which I'll tell you more about today. And I'm also the founder of Gleanly, an insight-based knowledge repository. And me and my team have been building this for about 5 years now. And why are we building a knowledge management system? Well, it's because reports are shit. So, why do I say this? Well, there's 5 main reasons, and we'll go through each one. So, I'm a user researcher, and my job is to do unbiased research. And this is the first problem with reports. Reports are biased. A great deal of research training is to ensure results are not biased by the person undertaking the research. However, this isn't true for reports. So, what we think we're supplying is the evidence and the recommendations supported by that evidence. Here is the evidence to support our recommendations, but the problem is often the evidence supplied in those reports is only the evidence that supports those recommendations. I've been guilty of this, but I speak to hundreds of teams a year, and very few disagree with me that this is true, at least in occasions, right? The problem is there are decision makers. It's the decision makers that need to make the decision, and it will be them that are held accountable if the decision is wrong. One of my favourite phrases as a UX researcher is, "It's not my job to be right, it's my job to find out what is right." And that's not always the case for project managers or product owners and those kind of people. And actually, at this point, it'd be great to ask the chat, what is it that your roles are? Who am I speaking to today? So pop in the chat, put in your job role. Are you a researcher, a designer, someone who does research, or more of a consumer of research, like a manager, a project manager, or a product owner? Okay. There's a bit of a delay on the stream, so I'm not going to see those at the moment. I can start seeing them coming through now. And my next question, and I want you to be really honest with this, for those that produce research, those that are research makers, how many of you do you think may have written reports where they're delivering the evidence to the decision maker, and they've delivered the evidence that they need to agree with the decision you've already made. You want them to go down a route, right? You want them to do this wonderful new project or idea you've got, and here's all the evidence to help them agree with you. So I can see some of them coming in. We've got UX researcher, senior UXR. Paula's a researcher of NHS education. Welcome on board. And yeah, we've got a business analyst there. So mostly researchers here we're talking to today by the looks of it. I'll keep an eye on that as it goes through. So mostly we're delivering evidence to people, right? And very often we can be biased when it comes to reports. So problem number 2, reports suffer from tunnel vision. And you can see there something I've forgotten to remove, which is where I translated this for a French audience. So only French speakers in the audience can enjoy this one now. So reports are usually written concerning just the findings of that particular research exercise. We did this user test and this is what we've learned. Okay, that's fine, but it does not give us a proper picture of what else is known. How can we make good quality decisions from just one source of evidence? Now you might think, well, I'll take that into consideration when I'm making the decisions, but do you really gather together everything you know on the subject and present that? Does your stakeholder know to do that? Do they know even where to find that information? In reality, us and our stakeholders are relying on our memory, and we're going to be more biased towards the study that is in front of our eyes, right? Just looking back in chat, yeah, mostly researchers here. So I want you to be putting up your hands if you've been guilty of really pushing forward an idea that you're really excited by and potentially biasing that. So problem number 3, reports make it hard to compare the evidence. So I don't just mean in terms of comparing evidence from other sources. That is difficult, but it's also difficult to compare the evidence in the actual report. In most reports, the overview and the experiment design is at the front. The actual findings in the middle, and then the recommendations at the end. Normally the structure for most. And this kind of makes it really hard to work out how things connect. How strong was the evidence for this recommendation? Does the evidence really support this idea? So in the last 2 points, I mentioned some issues with comparing the research that you've just done with existing research. But what about the process of actually finding and searching for research in other reports? You may have found some really good filing system that makes it really easy to find reports on a subject, but often that's not the case. And even then, when researching a subject, often lots of other things are discovered, and these are quite often lost because the report's not about those. So why would you even think to look into that? But also, you may not have even put it in that report because it wasn't relevant to what we were discussing. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So reports are hard to discover, but what happens when they do? And this leads to the next problem. Reports are fixed in time. Now, they're a representation of what you know now and what you might decide to do. So for most research reports, what happens after is not really recorded. Now, of course, that's not practical. It's not what a research report is meant to be doing. We have other methods and tools for that. But the problem comes when someone finds your report, if they can find it, and then uses that, what you've learned in the past to inform their work now. But they don't always know what happened after. Perhaps you did more work and discovered the evidence was flawed, or there was other factors that made it misleading. Perhaps the world just changed. You know, that's happened such and such a lot recently with COVID and all sorts of things massively changing the world. So this isn't an unusual thing. Knowledge evolves over time. Now, people used to believe that diseases were spread in the air, and they were right. Diseases can be airborne, but they thought it was the smell that was the issue. They didn't know about bacteria or viruses. And those doctors of ancient times, they weren't stupid. They weren't even wrong based on the evidence they had, but we know better now. So no one goes back to the old reports and says, well, we were wrong. Please don't use this. Or at least I've never seen it. Hands up in the audience if you do that, because I'll be really surprised. So how can we solve this problem? Well, first of all, don't panic. I have a solution and I'd like to share it with you. But first, let me take you back a few years when I was working for Just Eat, the world's biggest food delivery marketplace. JustEatTakeaway.com now as it is. Now, that photo from the right, just above my head right now, was actually from a project I worked on that I had the opportunity to order every single item on a restaurant's menu. One of those things I've always wanted to do, and actually doing so accidentally led to taking down a giant money laundering ring, but that's a story for another day. So maybe I need to do a talk on that sometime soon. But shortly after that photo was taken, I had the opportunity to found and lead the accessibility team at Just Eat. And this team was unusual in that it had representation from every part of the company. Because accessibility affects every part of an organisation after all. And it was great because everyone had really got behind this idea of being more accessible. And there was lots of passionate people excited to be a part of it. However, this meant we had an avalanche of research and reports coming from all around the company across many countries. Now, for our little team, that was impossible to manage. The biggest issue we had was the knowledge was being delivered in the form of reports, which obscured the insights. And it made it really hard to quickly gather information and find out what we already knew. But when we pulled the insights out of the reports, we lost all that valuable context. So I decided to focus on how we could theme this research to make it more discoverable. And the idea was that within those themes, we'd have specific insights. And the researchers and the people studying and supplying the knowledge could connect the evidence they had to support an insight. And then if they had a new insight that didn't seem to be covered, they could create a new theme. And others might say, well, actually, I've got something to support that. And they can add their research to that one as well. And in this way, we'd created a self-managing nodes of knowledge. And we realised that every piece of evidence could support multiple insights across multiple themes. Now, that's when it started getting complicated. When we started turning those insights into actionable recommendations, which could also be supported by multiple sources, it became even more unmanageable. So it was time to formalise this process and work out a way to deal with it. And I'm often credited as the inventor of atomic UX research, but in fact, I just introduced myself with that earlier in this talk. But actually, it's important to mention this work came about due to collaboration with many people and inspiration from other existing processes. And one particular person I want to shout out is David Yates, a great UX designer. And David first gave me the spark of this process when we were talking about the problem, and he was drawing on the whiteboard. And what he was drawing reminded me of Atomic Design by Brad Frost. So hands up in the chat if you know Atomic Design and you're using that in your work. If not, I massively recommend the next thing you should do after the talk, not now, is go and look up Atomic Design and Brad Frost's website, because it's fantastic and it's a really amazing way. For those that deal with UI, especially design systems, I don't think you could have a design system without Atomic these days. So this is a process you might already be using, but it's very similar. So Atomic Design helps you break down complex UI design into small atomic parts, make it easier to manage. And I thought, if we can do this for UI, perhaps we could do this for knowledge. So after a lot of work and finessing with many people inside and outside of Just Eat, this is what we came up with. A deceptively simple process with 4 distinct parts that creates molecules or atoms of knowledge. And it starts with experiments. This is what we did to discover the knowledge. This could be anything from a large-scale study to overhearing something on a bus, but it gives context for the facts. And I just wanted to say, if you're already aware of this process, sorry if you've heard about this already, but I'm going to talk about why this is a really effective way of dealing with issues in reports in a second as well, and bring that back round. So it starts with experiments. That's what we call experiments. Some people prefer to call those sources or studies or activities, but basically anything that you've done to create knowledge. And facts are that knowledge. They're what we learnt. So a good fact is a quote, an observation, or a statistic. But importantly, it's never our opinion. Insights, however, are our opinion of why the facts are the way they are. This is often the cause or the effect of the evidence, the connection between the fact and the recommendation. So recommendations are what we think we should do with this knowledge, the actual result of what's come before. Now, most recommendations are testable, which creates new experiments and the cycle continues. And this is the secret to creating a scalable knowledge repository which both retains the what and the why certain decisions were made, and importantly, what happened after as well. And each of these atoms connect together to create a molecule of knowledge. And in fact, a lot of people call these nuggets because of the great work Thomas Sharon has done on this subject. I really recommend looking at some of his writings on this subject because he's got some really amazing insight. But that simple process becomes really powerful when you see it from the perspective of each of those elements. So what you're seeing here is a molecule or nugget from the perspective of a fact. And this is usually the perspective we use when creating knowledge or synthesizing our findings. A fact always belongs to an experiment because of how it was learnt is intrinsic to the fact. We can't say we know this without saying how we know this. But a fact can be connected to many insights. Sometimes we have this one fact and we've got several ideas of what we think it means. And this is great because we might have several ideas of what the evidence is telling us. We don't need to argue about one idea. We can think broadly and explore lots of reasons. And I also think it's important that we can connect negatively to an insight, which is what that red dashed line going downwards means. This fact is evidence for these insights at the top and against this insight. I'm covering myself over now, so let me put myself in the corner. Here we go. So this is the perspective of an insight, and you can see the insight is actually connected to lots of facts. It's not just that one that we showed earlier. It's actually connected to lots of other facts across potentially lots of experiments. Ideally, several experiments. Ideally different types of sources as well. If it can be qualitative and quantitative or different sources, that really can give us confidence, right? And we can also see it's connected to several recommendations. Once again, we can have lots of ideas springing from one insight. And I like to synthesize my research with a cross-functional team. So we've got Lewis and Larissa in the chat here, but also our development team and beyond. And having the ability to have a range of ideas and different perspectives from different backgrounds and different life experiences. I'm from a design background, so I tend to be biased towards solving problems with UI. But a database analyst would likely have innovative ideas that would never have occurred to me. So this tends to be the view that other researchers find useful as well. And I'm most interested, when I'm looking at other people's research, I'm most interested in what you've learned, what's the evidence behind each insight, and perhaps less interested but curious about what you're going to do next. However, this is the view that stakeholders and decision makers love. Researchers can share this recommendation with a stakeholder along with the thinking or insights that led to this idea, and the evidence supports those insights. And then the stakeholder, the decision maker, gets a holistic view that makes it clear what the evidence is. What do we have for and against, and allows them to make informed decisions. And you can understand that evidence at the level that makes sense for them, right? They can go as deep as they want. They can scan the insights and glance at the evidence, or really go deep on each experiment to get an in-depth understanding of how the facts were learned. Sometimes a decision is very important. They need to go really deep. Perhaps that person is very detailed orientated, but maybe they just need to make a really quick decision, right? What's great for us as researchers is we only need to share one molecule, and then you can self-manage the level of detail the stakeholder wants. They can manage themselves. So when we've done some research around this, we've actually found that this process can reduce reporting in organisations between 60 and 80%. That was the normal kind of variable. You can imagine how much time that saves, doing 80% less reports than you were before. So after a lot of work on this process, I wrote an article on Medium. It's my first article, but it just went absolutely mad, and I don't know how many tens of thousands of times it's been viewed now, and it sparked a conversation that's gone around the globe. And I knew it was going really big when one of the first big teams that picked it up was the European Commission research team. But we've got some big company names in the chat today. So I know we saw NHS earlier. If you work for some big companies and you're using this process already, please pop it into the chat. Probably if you're using the process already, you've got bored and left. But if you are using this, or you know your organisation's using it, I know some big organisations like Amazon and Uber and NHS, as we mentioned, BBC are using this in some parts of the organisation. So it's very much taken its own life, and many people have their own methods and tweaks to the process to make it better for them. And the main thing I want to say is everyone's organisations are a little different. So take everything I'm telling you, everything I've told you so far, with a pinch of salt. Feel free to twist it, rename different sections especially. I've seen some organisations add layers on. I've never been convinced that was the right thing to do for everybody, but in some cases it is right to have an extra layer, something that makes sense for them. So yeah, every organisation is different, so feel free to don't feel that these are rules. This is just a guideline, an idea. And the good news is also that we can keep using the tools that we're already using and the methods that you love. They create the data. If you can see here on the left side, I think it would be for you, the research and analytics side. Look, I have to go that way. There we go. It's mirrored. You can see some tools. They're just some suggested tools, by the way. They're not things that you have to use. But all sorts, just to give it illustrate that all sorts of tools can do this. So the most unusual organisation that's using this process at the moment is an organisation that studies forensic science and particularly solves murders. And the problem they've got in those kind of situations, you get so many different types of evidence, from scientific and very quantitative evidence, should I say, to more the qualitative interview. And more we've got our digital spies spying on us, kind of trying to work out where we are. All of this evidence is very different, and being able to compare it can be very difficult. Now with Atomic, they find that's much easier. Being able to bring different things, go, actually, we know this, we know that, but that goes against this, or maybe that would take us in a slightly different direction, and try and work out what's right. So from those tools, this goes into the Atomic flow, into that blue space in their repository. So we've got our facts from the research, we've got our data from the research, we've analysed those into facts, and we've then processed those facts into insights and decisions in the form of recommendations. That's when it goes over to project management flow. So you're probably using Agile or something like that. Those things don't need to change. So the good news is it doesn't interrupt the ways of working that you're normally doing, but it isn't something additional. It's not like you do some research and at the end of it you then have to type it up into a report or record it into a repository. It's the part of doing the synthesis is making it ready to be shared and usable for the wider community. In fact, a great deal of people like to use the process just for synthesis, and they have no need to share it. Maybe they don't have anyone else to share it with, or it's a single project where there isn't an ongoing need. So where was I? Once they're completed in the project management part of the flow, they go back round and say, right, this is completed. Now it's time to retest it. And of course, then it goes back into the research analysis. We've made this change. We've implemented this feature or whatever it is we've done. Did that work? And then we can bring the data back round and go, yeah, that did work. That was successful, but we also learned other things. Or this didn't work. Maybe we've misinterpreted the information here. Maybe we've got something wrong. And we can try and study why. Maybe we can find other evidence from other parts of the organisation that shed some light on that. So let's go back over those issues we discussed at the beginning. First of all, reports are biased. So Atomic research forces people to think about the evidence they have for an assertion and keep themselves evidence-led. So for you, it's easy to see the recommendation, and for your stakeholders, it's easy to see the recommendation and the thinking behind that recommendation. And then the evidence that supports that thinking, those insights, or the evidence that goes against them. We can keep a balance. We say we know this, but we also know that. it can be very obvious if someone's trying to game the system. We find it's not impossible. You can attach evidence that doesn't really support the idea, but kind of does. But it very often becomes really obvious to whoever's making that decision, whoever's reviewing this. Wait a minute, those facts don't support those insights. Those insights don't support those recommendations. Now, I would say at this point, normally that's not intentional. Normally that is it normally comes from more kind of from researchers or non-researchers, particularly doing research where they've just got a bit overexcited. Maybe they're not so mature in their thinking there. So as the decision maker, they can choose how much detail they need. They can read the recommendation and glance at the insights if it's low risk, or they can dive deeper and see the evidence that supports the insights. So they can be really unbiased about this. And if they want to read every single customer comment, every observation, all the data that came together to form the recommendation, they can. So they might want to understand the experiment itself, and they can even go down to that. I've mentioned this already. So for us researchers, this is really great because we don't have to spend ages writing a detailed report trying to predict what people want to know. We can just share that recommendation. And even better, we can get stakeholders involved in this process in creating the insights and recommendations. We no longer have to just be like, well, this is what the researcher thinks, this is what the UX designer thinks. Actually, here's some ideas that have come from stakeholders, from clients, from other people in the team, maybe some other people who quite often have really good ideas, but maybe aren't so much involved in that ideation process. And maybe those people would be aware of other evidence or other projects that are available that might shed a different light on it. So reports suffer from tunnel vision. How can Atomic help this? So as I just mentioned, we might find evidence in other projects, but one of the key superpowers is being able to join up evidence from multiple sources from across the organization. And in fact, when your repository starts getting more and more mature, it's possible to answer some questions only with the evidence that are there already. And this is another time saver. You can start with a recommendation as a hypothesis and work backwards. You can start with an insight as an assertion and go, well, actually, the one I always go to for some reason is I believe that our customers prefer cats to dogs. Okay, well, do we have any data that supports that? Maybe not. Maybe we find actually we've got a really weird, unusual amount of people who love parrots or something. Okay, I wasn't expecting to learn that, but we can very quickly create ideas and find out if they're true or not. But in those cases, we're even choosing what we study based on evidence, which is going to give us a greater chance of success. So what I mean by that is sometimes we might find gaps in our knowledge, and we can find out what's the best way to answer those gaps and give us more confidence. Because we can make a recommendation and we might go, actually, yeah, this is a nice idea, but we don't actually think the evidence that we've connected or we already hold is enough to make that decision. So when we come back to look at our findings, we're able to make decisions based on everything we know, not just that specific study. And that evidence is right there, connected clearly, that shows us what supports and what disproves our theories. It's really visceral. So reports make it hard to compare evidence. And so actually the thing I was just saying is a really good example of this. It makes it really easy to compare evidence. Importantly, it makes it easy to compare lots of different types of evidence as well. For example, qualitative research such as interviews and user tests with more quantitative research such as A/B tests or user data. And this is because the process is agnostic on source. We can bring any type of research to bear. I mentioned about the people studying murders earlier, right? Any type of evidence can come and help us make decisions. So one of the most common problems actually our customers are trying to solve and people we speak to are trying to solve is de-siloing knowledge, not just between products and teams, but disciplines too. For example, we know that marketing have lots of useful data, or perhaps customer support, sales, business strategy, perhaps even management have something that might be useful to us. So, and as I said, we have lots of non-UX teams at Gleanly using this process, and find it really useful to create a shared platform where everyone in the organization all knows what everyone else knows, or at least a portion. In Gleanly, in fact, and I know some other companies that do that, we even include development data. So this API can do this, but it can't do that. This would be, if a customer asks for this thing, it's really easy, but this thing over here would require a massive refactor. Now, for me, who designs the product, that's so useful, right? We know what our customers want, we know what is valuable to them, but we also know what's actually possible and easy to achieve in the short term and long term. Now, reports are fixed in time. So Atomic research solves this by allowing you to connect new evidence as it becomes available. And this has been really useful recently, with such big world events changing our way of life. So we might have evidence from a few years ago that's changed massively due to COVID, right? Energy crisis and so many other things. We're just onboarding a UK bank at the moment, and they told me something interesting. They said that people think banks are very traditional, and for many things they are, but also the landscape can change on a daily basis. So, something can happen in the news, and then suddenly, something happened a little while ago where our Prime Minister made a decision that completely dropped the pound massively. And then suddenly this had inflation and mortgages flying up. Overnight, people who thought they had a mortgage didn't, So they had to react quickly, have to deal with these things. So things can change overnight for an organisation, and we need to be able to react to that as well in our decision making and our strategies too. At this point, I'm going to welcome Cecile, who's project manager as well. So you'll know exactly what I mean by that. But it affects everybody in the team, doesn't it? So this can be true for different contexts as well. For example, here we see A/B testing across 3 different countries. We tested it in the UK, we found it worked. We tested it in France, and we can see it was even more valuable there. But the increase, but then when we tested in Italy, and something's gone massively wrong. So what happened? My first reaction would be to check the A/B test was set up correctly. Perhaps it had a bug or was badly translated, but perhaps we can rescue this test. But that's all fine. But perhaps there's something culturally in Italy I don't understand. Maybe that test is absolutely fine. And yeah, it's just something I don't understand as a British person around that subject in Italy. Now, as I learn more, I can connect it up and increase the scope and depth of our understanding. And if we find that actually Italians hate free shipping, and we can record that others will know that, before they will try and roll it out in future, maybe we'll learn something speaking to those customers that will help us perform better in that market and handle those audiences. By the way, I don't think, if there's any Italians in the chat, let me know, but I don't think that's, I've got quite a few Italians in the family, and I think they love something free. So, and of course, if this cultural perception or whatever it is that we've recorded shifts, we find evidence that that's not true anymore, we can update this, we can add new evidence, and it will go, yeah, actually that was true in 2021, but now in 2023, things are looking different. And we can make sure everyone's informed and reacts appropriately. Reports are hard to search. So this brings me on to this point. Reports are really hard to search, and because the way that Atomic is broken down is designed to be easy to find insights and evidence about a certain subject, right? Even when the studies aren't about that subject. One of the first companies I worked with on Atomic outside of Just Eat was quite a big brand that has been around for hundreds of years. And when we started going through recent research, that team again, the same comments kept on coming up. There would be a mention of this issue, or maybe just once or twice in about half of the user reports, but it kept on coming up. And it's the kind of thing that wouldn't seem all that important at the time when you're studying that subject. But when we brought this evidence together across lots of reports, we could see there was a serious issue, and we let the department know who was responsible for this and showed them the evidence. They sprung into action, and really easy to solve. They managed to solve it in less than 2 weeks, but they later told me that issue would have stopped the company being able to trade properly in their biggest sales period. About a month or two where 70% of their revenue was generated. It wasn't a big issue to fix. As I say, it took less than 2 weeks to implement, but it could have put that brand out of business, or at least cause a massive issue to them. And it was only caught by being able to connect evidence from across hundreds of studies, across several teams and lots of different objectives. So in short, atomic research saved a company's life in its very first outing. Very proud of that. So on a more common level, it's extremely powerful for us researchers and product designers to be able to find out what we know about a subject at the click of a button. So, for your product designers in the room, how often are you asked to knock a design up or a wireframe up in short notice? I know it's a regular thing. And in those instances, we haven't got time to read through piles of reports to extract those insights. We certainly haven't got time to spin up new research, but we can dive into our repository and find out what we already know. And for you decision makers and product owners like Cecile and others in the chat, it's so helpful to be able to see a list of evidence-led recommendations that you can filter by priority, complexity, opportunity, whatever you want. And I have to tell you, that makes life so much easier. So in summary, what are the benefits of atomic research and the process for doing that research? So it removes personal bias, encourages retesting, forces you to think about the why, and this often leads to more innovative solutions. One of the most common feedbacks I get from researchers is, I thought I understood my research till I started processing it through the atomic process. Now I started looking at it differently. And the key thing, the thing that I believe that makes that happen, is creating an insight. It can be so easy to say, this fact, the customer did this, so we're going to do that. But then when we say, why are those two things connected? Quite often the answer is, it's obvious. Well, it's obvious to be easy to write the insight, but actually it's quite often not. Sometimes in those situations where it seems obvious, they're the hardest insights to write. And when you write them and you think about, what is the thing that connects those? Quite often a light bulb goes off. It just creates a different point of view. It's a great framework for non-researchers as well. It's lightweight framework. It's not too heavily structured, but it does give that framework and helps non-researchers, especially from reducing bias. And it allows large scale with low management. So for those that actually need to manage the knowledge and other researchers or non-researchers doing research in an organization, the atomic process makes it really easy to see where people are going wrong. The information isn't caught up in reports that you have to read the entire thing. You can see what's being pulled out, what recommendations are made, and whether they are generally being supported, whether people are making assertions based on data that doesn't really support it. And so from a repository point of view, something shareable, we get a holistic view of the evidence from the whole organisation and beyond. Evidence for and against, which is so important, and allows us to move quickly with confidence. One of the main things that is so hard to really state how valuable it is how it encourages collaboration. So many times I've seen where conversations have started between teams that may have never talked, maybe weren't even aware of each other before, but they found a commonality, they found a connection over a problem that maybe one of them solved, or they're both trying to solve at the same time. And I've seen on several occasions now where really cool products have been created because these two teams are working together and started collaborating and came up with ideas. I think that's a wonderful thing. So another benefit that is often missed, but kind of relates to what I was just saying there, is it's so and it's really powerful. It allows more people to get involved in the research. And I don't just mean as a consumer of that knowledge, but creating it too. And so many companies I speak to recognize it's not just researchers that do research anymore, and everyone has knowledge and it affects every part of an organization. And being able to bring people together. Sorry, I'm getting myself tongue-tied. As the person responsible for designing our product, I need to know what they know, what other people in the organization know, and being able to know what we're learning from in sales, and people who are supporting customers, they're quite often frontline, right? Everybody is working with knowledge, and being able to bring that together is really powerful. And it's it's where a lot of really interesting products come out of. Actually, I'm going to talk about one in a second. So it allows us to make better decisions, and this is really the key thing overall. The biggest benefit of Atomic, I believe, but a repository in general, is being able to make better decisions. This is why us UX researchers exist, right? This is why we do what we do. This is why we're in this role, is to help people make better evidence-based, more informed decisions. So I had to show you the screenshot. So Phil here is a delivery manager for a client of mine. And I really loved this reaction where when the researcher first shared this experiment with him. And he had it all laid out for him to dive in, get involved in, and ultimately make better decisions. And in case you thought I was being too utopian, how do I say that word? Utopian? I think that's right, isn't it? In what I'm saying, I think this is another important benefit, being able to defend those decisions. Once you've made those decisions, and as an atomic research repository can help defend them. So this is especially useful for the project managers. And I remember a project manager I was chatting to telling me how she'd recently had some user research that had forced them to reprioritize their roadmap. And the problem is this had meant that some of the features had been cut out. And some of those were the ones that the CEO was particularly keen on. And then when he found out that his favourite projects had been cut, he called the PM to office to answer some questions on this decision. And she was able to pull up the Atomic repository and talk him through the evidence and explain why she'd made this call. And not only did she not get into any trouble, she got commended by the CEO for making a good call. And he also asked for access and got into the knowledge repository so he could keep on top of the evidence coming in. So she noted how much shorter meetings were with him because he knew what they were working on and why, So in that case, they were aware of the same information, able to move in the same direction. This is another benefit, being able to move in the same direction. And I'm not claiming that Atomic is going to solve every problem. Of course it isn't. But having shared knowledge is a big step towards solving a lot of them. And I think... I've even been on onboarding workshops or in talking to, different stakeholders and keepers of knowledge and organisation. And there's been comments going, I didn't even know we had that team. I remember one organisation that said, we've got a UX team. I didn't know that was the case. They were quite a small new team at the time, to be fair to them. But, I think that's happened at least 3 times. And even if they didn't even know a whole department ever existed, how can we expect them to be pulling in the same direction? How can we expect them to be able to create unified products and better products if they don't know what they're doing? So just simply knowing what teams are working on sparks conversations, encourages collaboration and innovation, and value is not far behind, right? So I'm not going to go into tools too much at this stage because we're actually going to be talking a little bit more about that. We've covered a lot of the basics of Atomic, and we've got another talk coming up next Tuesday, where we're going to talk about the basics of Atomic, the fundamentals of Atomic, and you kind of covered that already. So with a few minutes left, I will just quickly run through this. But I'd really recommend you come along to the one on the 15th, I believe it is. I'm sure Lewis will put into chat if I'm wrong on that, where we're going to go into more advanced things, not just tools, but processes, best practices, taxonomy, those kind of things. So I really hope you'll join us for that. So if you just want to get started, just want to try it out, the most obvious way is with sticky notes, right? Good old sticky notes. Us UX people love them, right? So we've got at the top there, facts, and then insights in the middle, and then recommendations at the bottom. We're just drawing lines. And this is great for group synthesis. It's great for just trying it out at very low cost. Not so good for creating a shared repository, which is where Airtable comes in. This is great for remote teams and really cheap. Most companies already have Airtable, and this could be a really good way of getting started. The issue we had with this is what I was using back in the Just Eat days and beyond that, for many years with clients, we're trying to use Airtable, and we found it was great, but it just didn't scale very well, and it's very easy to break. But most of all, and the main reason we ended up dropping it was it just wasn't very approachable for non-researchers, and that's the most important thing, right? So there are actually a few Airtable bases set up for to get you started. So this one is from someone I mentioned already, which is Thomas Sharon, who has been a great thinker in this space. So he set up and shared the Polaris base, which he's created when he was head of research for WeWork. It's really useful, maybe a little bit focused on WeWork, and I do find some of the bits a little bit confusing. And actually, one I think is maybe a little bit better is this one by Martin and Jeremy at Devo Team. I think they may have changed their name, so I hope I've not miscredited them there. But yeah, if you search Atomic Research Base Airtable, you'll find that. Yeah, they very kindly shared it with others to benefit. So yeah, we ended up actually building our own tool around this. The main thing that we wanted to be able to achieve was be able to switch the views. And everything I've told you about today, you can use with some of those tools I mentioned already. You don't need to use our special tool. I'm just going to make this full screen. And but there was a few things we couldn't do with Airtable, Miro, other tools like that. And one of those is being able to switch the views. And there was lots of other things we wanted to be able to do. We couldn't quite manage to do that. So we created a process, and I would love it if you wanted to give it a go. And it's there's a 30-day free trial, and it starts at £18 a month. But I think you'd really appreciate it. So I'm going to finish up saying something you might not expect. Reports are great, and I know I said they were shit, but there are also some positives to them as well. So let me defend reports just a little and just give them a little bit of credit back. So reports are fixed in time. And once again, I've said this already as a negative. This is a problem, but it's also a good side as well. They can be misleading, but they're also useful as a snapshot of what we knew and how we were thinking at a certain point in time. And that's something that Atomic sometimes can miss, is like, okay, well, we've got all of this evidence. It's really helping me make decisions now, but what did we have at that point in time? How did it used to look? And this is the reason why in some of those 30 to 20% of cases, you may still need to create a report. And sometimes this is the other reason people, when we were doing interviews around, who were using reports and why wasn't Atomic capable of doing everything, is reports can tell us more than just the evidence. They can speak to other factors in our environment that may not be evidence-based. Pressure from management, for example, team dynamics, such as people joining and leaving, whatever else is happening at the time. And as much as I love Atomic and I believe it's incredibly powerful, it can miss that wider context that isn't easily incorporated in experiments, facts, insights, and recommendations. Sometimes it's useful just to be able to tell a story. So we actually recently launched a new feature. Excuse me going into a little bit of a sales pitch here. I hope you'll excuse me. But we just created a feature about 8 months ago now called Reports. And this is in recognition that reports do serve a purpose, and despite their many failings. But we thought we can do better. As I said, it's important for a report to capture a moment in time, but also what other factors were in play. But we also wanted to ensure those people can see how knowledge has changed and evolved in the meantime. So with our reports tool, you can add in really quickly, pull things out of your repository, put them in, add images, videos, text, whatever you need to tell that story, publish it, and that freezes it in a moment of time. And so in 4 years' time, you can come back later and go, right, why did Dan make this silly decision? Actually, I can see what he knew then. That makes sense. But toggle it, and it shows the live data. It shows what is known now. And I think I really love this tool, because I think I'm not aware of anything else that can do this, and it's I love it. So we're coming up to the hour. In fact, we've hit the hour. So I understand if anyone needs to leave, but I'm going to hang around and answer any questions that you might be having. Now, also, last thing to say. After this, we're going to be sending out some gifts. So hopefully Larissa, or we'll send out an email. Larissa can put a link in the chat, or we'll send out an email afterwards. We've got a certificate that we can give to you that says the basics of Atomic. You can share this on LinkedIn or put it in your portfolio, whatever you want to do with it. And also we're going to share a Atomic research cheat sheet as well, which was created with the help of Marielle de Geest. It's a really useful way of just being able to reference and understand, keep yourself on what is a fact, what's an insight, what's a recommendation, what makes a good one. And I really hope you join us for the other Atomic October talks. So, as I said, the next one is next Tuesday on the 10th, and I think Lewis has put these in the chat as well. So, 10th of October, 6 p.m. BST, and this is the introduction to UX research. Now, if you've watched this today, you've got that really. It's going to be that central bit that we talked about in the middle about what is Atomic, maybe a couple of small things, but nothing that I think you need to give us a whole half hour or hour for. So, but if you're excited about the subject, I really encourage you to bring your colleagues in. Maybe they could come and join that. And if you want to understand Atomic at a deeper level, we have advanced atomic research, taxonomy and best practices. And that's Tuesday the 17th, not the 15th, the 17th at 6 p.m. BST. And then finally on Tuesday, 24th of October, we're going to show Gleanly, do an onboarding of Gleanly and really show what it's powerful and what it's capable of, and give you more of an insight into that. There's never going to be any pressure to use that, but love you to give it a go. So I wonder if we've got any questions in the chat, and this may be a bit awkward because I know we've got a bit of a delay on there. But I'm just going to have a quick look. I'm going to say thank you so much to Julia, who's curious for the next one. Paula, who says it's a really interesting session. Thank you so much. Now I'm gonna mess up your pronunciation. I'm so sorry, but is it Soledad Fernandez? So thank you. So thank you very much, Amandus. Thanks. Hope we see you if in the next session or the advanced one. It'd be really good. If anyone, I saw actually there was a couple of questions further up, and one of them was about Thomas Sharon's involvement in this. So it's an interesting story, and I'm hoping we don't misrepresent it too much. But basically, when I released that first article on Medium about atomic research, someone said, is that any relation to Thomas Sharon's atomic research? And I was like, oh my lord, we've found a name that someone else has used. And I looked at what he was trying to do, which was basically at that point was atomize videos mostly. It was basically to chop up videos or other sources into what he was calling nuggets, which are just little kind of findings that were tagged and sourced, but just to make it easier, more approachable to do research. And I could see that basically he had pretty much what we had, but maybe just missing recommendations. And now he was a big famous UX researcher, and I certainly wasn't at the time. And but I reached out to him and said, Toma, would you mind us having a chat? I think we've kind of got some synergy here. And very kindly, he gave me quite a bit of his time, and we ended up collaborating a little bit. We tweaked ours a little bit, he tweaked his a little bit, and we kind of found a way that we're both really believe in. So hopefully that answers your question. It looks like there was a couple of questions coming in. So Alessio says, my org is very much slide deck driven when it comes to sharing knowledge. How do you bake presentation storytelling into a typical atomic research deliverable in a way that is compelling and engaging? I think that's one of the failings, as I say, of Atomic is it's really useful to be able to say, you're working on this. I've got an insight for you. Just chuck it over to them. Boss, I need a decision on this. We want to do this. Do you think this is a good idea? Share that recommendation with them. Or if they ask you the question, why are you making those decisions? You go, these are the reasons why. But it is missing that storytelling, right? It's giving them everything they need to know, all the evidence, and makes that really visceral. But it is missing that storytelling, which is normally where if someone is still creating reports, that still happens. And I find a lot of times with agencies that are talking to customers, especially those that aren't kind of embedded or kind of consultative in there, quite very often they will need to go, right, we've rebranded your organization, here is a presentation on that. But they might have Atomic working behind, bringing all of those answers. And they may actually share that as a deliverable at the end. Here is your new brand. Here's the presentation that explains it all, but also this is all the learnings in a lovely little package where you can break that down and use it in your future work as well. And the great thing there is it doesn't really add anything to the brand. It doesn't really add anything to the storytelling, but it means that they've captured all this knowledge that the agency would be walking away with. They haven't got that brain drain that happens when you're using third-party agencies. And of course, that means they'd be more valuable, more engaging, and they're more likely to get re-engaged in the future. So there can be a benefit there. Heather says, I like this. The atomic model addresses my frustrations with finding and reusing insights. Yeah, so that's the main thing, right? It's creating, I think I used the term like nodes of knowledge. Be able to bring anything in and be able to combine them. Not only is that useful and does it give us more confidence, but so often does it mean that you come back and go, oh, I hadn't thought about it this way. But able to bring different things, bring different things together so often kind of opens the mind and helps people see it from different directions. And there was an example I kind of showed earlier. I didn't talk to it, but we had a client where they had some survey results come back, and they found that there seemed to be an unusual number of people who preferred colour green. And they said the original question was, should this be a fact or an insight? And in a lot of systems, you'll notice they'll refer to insights. What they're talking about, what we're talking about, is a fact, right? The survey showed that people prefer green as a colour. Okay, but that to me isn't an insight, because that's just the fact of what the people said in the survey. What does that mean to us? Does that mean that we're missing out on selling blue and red clothes? Does it mean that we could have an opportunity to be the green company, the green clothing company? You know, what's the cause of this? Why is this even the case? Their logo was, or their branding wasn't green. So there were some questions around that. Maybe we had other evidence to be able to answer that. Was it even true, or was that survey misleading? You know, maybe green was just the easiest button to click. And so very quickly we were able to grab sales data from elsewhere in their organization. And they were able to say, actually, yeah, we're selling a lot more green clothes than others, especially, you know, depending on where you break down the different hues, whether, you know, does teal fall into green, you know, those kind of questions. But yeah, there's a big spike around the green kind of band. So there's definitely something going on here. And in that call, we were able to say, well, we might not know the reason why. We need to do some other research to find out the reason why. But what can we do about this? What's the recommendation? Well, one of the recommendations is go and do more research and try and discover this, because we think there's something valuable here. But also, well, why don't we switch out the main picture on the... I should be making myself full screen. You're talking to an empty screen there. You know, we're talking... We know that people prefer green clothing, so why don't we make the clothing on the main picture on the hero image on their website green? And yeah, when I spoke to them about a month later, I asked them about that. And I can't remember the figure. I really wish I'd recorded this, but it was something like a 4% uplift or something quite significant, especially to them. So it was really valuable that they had found that. So Julia said, I'm afraid the atomic structure might empty the context and end up getting in the way of making decisions, especially for people not used to with research. I'm not sure I 100% understand, so I'd love a little bit more information there, Julia. What I would say is context is probably the word I say most of all, and that was basically the originator, the seed of atomic was if we take that fact or that finding outside of, or that insight out of outside of a report, we lose the context. There was so much in that report that helped us understand why this insight is the way it was, or even what we mean by that. If we say, you know, people prefer the colour green, that's only useful in the context of when we did the survey about clothing, right? We're not saying people prefer green buttons or, you know, green grass necessarily. We're talking about specifically in this particular demographic that we sent surveys to said this at this time. And so, yeah, pulling that out removes that context, but in the atomic fashion, it's still linked back. Well, how did we know that? Well, we've got this survey over here, but we've also looked at the sales data. We've actually got two sources. So very quickly, and it's one of the reasons you'll notice on Gleanly, if you use it, when you create a fact or an insight or recommendation, we have these titles, the fact title or the insight title, and they're limited to 255 characters. We want to keep them short, keep them really short. And the reason is they need to be bite size. We know that we know that customers prefer the colour green. How do we know that? We did a survey and 60%, 70% said they prefer colour green. We looked at our sales data and we've seen that. We changed the photo out on the homepage and we saw conversion go up 4%. How much more evidence do you need? Well, what we need is evidence to find out why. We need that. What we need now is the more qualitative research that helps us understand why that's the case, of course. But we've got very strong confidence that it's true, right? We can act on it. We already have acted on it. Hopefully that's answered your question there, Julia. Let me know if it hasn't, though. I really would appreciate that. And, you know, it might be in your situation, you're right. You know, it's not a one size fits all. Majority of situations, I haven't seen many organizations or types of organization where this doesn't work, but it does happen, right? It does happen. And I'm only going to see a biased view of that myself, right? I'm only going to be speaking to people who have thought this idea might work in our organization. I don't see those people who go, oh, that's a nice idea, but it wouldn't work for us. They don't speak to me. Of course they don't, you know, even though I'd love to speak to them, I'd be really interested in it. But I'm going to have a slightly biased subsection of people that I'm speaking to that it has worked for, that it is providing value for. So that's going to be the case. There was something else I was going to say about that as well, but I think my brain is finally fried, especially with the stress of when this live just wouldn't start. Every time I pressed the button, it said, YouTube's not receiving your connection. No! I can see you all there going, come on, Dan, where are you? So that was fun. I might go and drink some beer now. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Heather, Julia, Salidiad, Mohammed, everyone else that's been on here and talked through the chat. Anyone who's been watching and hasn't talked in the chat, your viewing this participation is very much welcome. And if you weren't confident or comfortable asking your question in the chat, feel free to look me up on LinkedIn or wherever you prefer to find your people. I'm not on Twitter or X anymore. Hell with that. But most other places I'm available, and I'm always willing to geek out about this with you. So please give us a shout. But also, don't forget to come along to, what was it now, 15th, 16th? I think it was the 16th. 17th, oh my God, I was completely off. On the 17th, Tuesday the 17th, Advanced Atomic Research, Taxonomy, Best Practices, Theory, the lot. That is what we're going to be talking about on the 17th, and I hope to see you there. Have a wonderful night.